But for Christians, I think it is important for people to know that you are a Christian in the workspace you're in your family, in your neighborhood. And so what is that? How do people identify themselves as? Because we would say, it's by what they do in the deeds, in their good deeds. But I'm like, sometimes, sure, but most of the time we do look a lot like our neighbors on the surface. It's only when you get a bit deeper that you see there's a difference. But people, I think, do need to know where their Christians are, like more now than maybe in the last decade or so.
Well, I just started thinking about all the passages. One is we're a royal priesthood. So, they become quite cliche, some of these verses. But if you sort of thought about that, a kind of royal priesthood, like Christians, like somebody that actually, I'm just sort of dreaming and imagining here of, wow, you traverse two worlds. And that's kind of an invitation. Not to everybody, but it could be.
Yeah. Kia ora koutou and welcome to Lunch on the Way. I'm Joey. This is Graeme. Welcome to the podcast. Basically today what we're looking at is we're just debriefing our conversation with Andrew Root, but we go into a bunch of different places. We talk about evangelism. We talk about church growth and spiritual growth and what is actually stabilizing you. Is it growth? Is it not? What should be stabilizing us as Christians? We go into the priesthood of all believers and also ministers as priests and talk a lot more about that. But if you've been a part of the conversation for a while now and you think this is interesting or fascinating and you want more people to get involved, we would always encourage you to rate this podcast on whatever podcasting platform you're using. That helps the algorithm know that this is something you like. As well, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit like and comment and subscribe. All of that just is a helpful way of letting people know that we exist. And that would be really appreciated. The music that you were listening to the last two episodes and this one, it was my friend Josiah Swim, who has a bunch of music on Spotify. I travel with him in a worship band for 3 summers. He is a phenomenal musician, and I love his music. And if you want to listen to more of his stuff, you can find him on Spotify, typing Josiah David Swim. Anyway, hope you enjoy this conversation that we just had.
God bless.
So what did you think of our conversation with Andrew yesterday?
Yeah, no, I thought it was good. I thought it was a bit more lucid, us in and out of it. I thought it was more of a conversation than we've had with others. What did you think?
Yeah, I think overall I like how we approached it, how we just went into it.
We sort of climbed into it. The sort of segue into the book. I hadn't read the book, but it was sort of,
neither had I, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just kidding.
But it did open that sort of,
it did.
Like despair and sort of the sort of consolation thing. I thought that was, which sort of then opened up the space.
Yeah, and then so what did he say about that? He said that evangelism. You wrote down here. We wrote down some thoughts after a conversation with Andrew, and we'll just have a conversation and see what happens about this. But he said that evangelism typically has been instrumentalized, and it's like an object, like an apologetic object of like, I need to go and do evangelism.
Yes.
But he was positioning evangelism more as a posture.
Yes,
and more as like a way of being and leaning into people's despair and grief as a way of consoling them. So like evangelism is consolation.
Yes.
And
so that kind of opens that up. So I think Andrew's his bottom sort of value theological frame is very relational. It's about so ministry is relational. Yeah. So and I think trying to get my head around, Andrew, and I'm going to keep reading, pondering Christopraxis, because I think that's the book that gives you a lot of into how Andrew's seeing the world. And so, and I don't know if I can explain this very well, but he talks about as we engage with the other, so in the despair, the others, so it's a death. There's nothing there. There is so that no hope, that empty void opens itself up for the resurrection, for the death resurrection story. So we bring that. Our story is one that is death to life, whereas he in Christopraxis reflects on the Aristotelian idea of the actuality to possibility, which is that where I don't fully understand, or I need to get my head around that because I'm not a reader of Aristotle. I don't claim to know about it, but it's that I think it's that idea that we constructing the answers.
Yeah.
We find a way forward.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that in that space of despair, we're surprised because God, and it's not only something, God is active in the world.
Yeah.
God is at work in the world.
Yeah.
And I really, from a ministry point of view, I find that just incredibly empowering.
Well, it's freeing as a minister, to be honest.
Well, because or
as a Christian, to be honest.
Because it's not about you.
Yeah.
So, it's not us constructing the hope.
Yeah.
It's simply leaning into the space, knowing that we're part of a not just a story, but the reality.
Yeah.
It's Matthew 6, and that chapter. As he says to those that are listening in the Sermon on the Mount, and that look at creation, look at the birds of the air, look at the lilies of the field. Can you not see that your Heavenly Father clothes them? It's this. I think it's this awareness. So don't worry about tomorrow, because underneath all of the cosmos, it is God's world, and He is sovereign.
Yeah.
And that's, in a world of despair, that's incredible.
Well, I while we were talking with him, I couldn't help but just see how much his critique of secularism is just at play within his theology and his ministry practice, or at least his ministry philosophy of practice, and because this evangelism as consolation to people who in despair is basically to say that, hey, we need to wait on God. There's a waiting. There's moments where you can actually see God at work in people's lives, and it's actually in those moments of despair and the need for consolation. And where a secular imagination sees us, individuals, as the sovereign who needs to actualize the world.
Yeah, yes.
Where it's a disenchanted world that's out there. It's what you see is what you get, and I need to will to power in the world, essentially.
Yes. I think you're actually, I think you're describing that. Because I was thinking about, you and your metaphors, and I'm thinking, what is the, not that the death and resurrection is a metaphor, but in one sense, that's the thing that's playing. Is that the thing that ought to be playing in our heads, in our imagination? Because I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly.
That he's saying as I minister is like. So when you think of evangelism in a world of despair, and you think that ours, what he was saying, a kind of ministry of consolation, that's evangelism, then that suggests to us, like that's why I called it a posture, then what kind of, if you were to think in that sort of framework of imagination as in sort of cognition, knowledge, and then in that other category of our affections as desire, and then the kind of skills, what kind of skills would be important in participating in a ministry of consolation?
Well, that's the one.
I mean, it's an interesting question, eh?
That's so within that. Like, I think I need to make a distinction about what I think he wasn't saying, which is that there's people who are in despair and there's people who aren't, and us Christians aren't in despair, and people out there are in despair. Therefore, we need to go and be people of consolation. That's evangelism. I don't think what he's saying at all. I think he's saying, and I articulate this a little bit, that we're all humming, if you will, like a little hum in the noise or in the PA system. Yeah. Like we're all humming despair in the world. Yeah. In a very real way, and some certainly more than others without any redemptive hope. Yeah. Right? And so Christians would say, we live in a broken world and there's difficulty that comes and it's tough, but it's Christ who consoles us in the world.
Yes.
And so evangelism then is us in Christ helping to bring consolation to the world. And what that signaled in my brain, and I didn't get the chance to say it, was, oh, so we're all priests. Mm-hmm. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And that drives well with this whole idea of the priesthood of all believers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's two kind of ways of looking at it, because I think a lot of our conversations on this podcast so far, Graeme, have been about how the pastor and ministry philosophy and doing ministry, and I'm sure there are things that can connect with people that aren't pastors, which I think the majority of people listening to this aren't pastors. And I think the bit that connects into it is this priesthood of all believers aspect, but there does need to be like a differentiation. I do think that there needs to be pastor priests who are vocationally, that's who they are, but also there's a sense in which we all carry that mantle to a certain degree in the world that we're living in. And so I want to throw it to you. What is, if we're all priests in that priesthood of all believers sense, as Christ as our high priest, then what does that look? What do you think a priest should look like in the world right now, if we're all kind of priests in that sense?
Well, I mean, I've had these conversations with a couple of coachees about, so how do you see yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, and generally for a pastor, it's shepherd.
Yeah. And
so then as we've talked, sort of tried to open the box, as it were, to say, well, actually there are other perspectives. And, if Jesus was prophet, priest and king, what might that say to the pastoral kind of posture? And so the priest one, I think, it's not unrelated to actually that as a priest, we maybe I'm asking this as a question because I'm thinking out loud. We create kind of that, I don't think we create the sacrament in place, but we can facilitate that.
Yeah.
So as a priest, then what's important is being present. Being present is not just about me being present, but it's being present to the fact that God is here. Mm-hmm. And that and as that priestly role is actually, I think, trying to bring awareness to that space for the other, whatever that means, which I think probably is a really attentive listening. I see this in chaplaincy when I talk to Linda.
Yeah.
Just
to give some background, what does Linda do?
So she's she has been a chaplain. She now manages sort of Auckland and Northland chaplains
within the hospitals.
Yeah, the hospital system. Yeah. So chaplaincy Aotearoa New Zealand is the government's go-to for all chaplaincy in hospitals.
Yeah.
So that's still Christian, actually. So when you're beside somebody that's facing their mortality, I mean, you can't just download them. So I suspect that what you're doing in that space is you're coming into that space. So it's those words of hospitality hit me as well. How do you bring in the non-anxious presence? And the non-anxious presence is not unrelated to how can you be non-anxious in a space? Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of in my coaching. I've done a little bit of this too, is sort of trying to get coachees aware that actually you can't bring what you've got because actually you haven't got
We don't have
anything.
A lot. Yeah.
So, but when you realise that and you walk into that space, that Christ is actually in the wood. I mean, he reveals himself to Moses in what looks a pretty dark sort of thing. Go back to Egypt, get your people out of there.
Yeah.
And Moses said, well, who are you? Well, I am. I find those words extraordinary because the I am is I am in at this moment in time. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's kind of around.
It sounded like you're a mediating presence.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's.
Yeah, well, you're conscious of it, and therefore, because you're conscious that actually it's not you, you're sort of, I think, resting in that Christ is present in here, and then you're looking for where He may.
Yeah.
And I think this is not Christ is. I mean, this is Trinitarian. This is the Spirit is at work here, but it is Christ that we are who ministers.
Yeah.
So in that sense, of the true sense, I guess, the Luke Acts story, church is the ongoing ministry of Christ. So
Yeah.
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 Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was listening to our conversation with Frank on the way here this morning, because we just published that one yesterday, and I always listen back to them because there's always things that I don't hear in the conversation that I want to hear, and I couldn't help but get the impression that his ministry philosophy and his way of approaching ministry is really similar to Andrew, and it's just being a presence in the space. Of not trying to force something, not trying to conjure something up, being attentive. And what I thought was really fascinating was Andrew, when you asked him the question, what do you think is a core competency of a pastor? And this is, I think, more universal than just a pastor. What do you think I think we can say, what is a core competency of a Christian? And he noted something that either the group we were with, I won't say anything else other than that, didn't note.
Yes, I know.
He noted they need to teach people how to pray, or logically they need to know how to pray and know how to teach others how to pray. So maybe the parishioner needs to know how to pray, but the pastor needs to know how to teach people how to pray.
Yes, and that teach to people to pray was just a cognitive knowledge thing. This is what you do, or this is what it's actually really embodied. Mm-hmm. So that embodied is a sort of way of being as well. I think that's where Andrew was as well. Yeah. Well, it can't help but be a way of being if prayer becomes, teaching people to pray, because pray can be just silent.
Well, exactly. It's like, what do you mean? Like, is it the words? Is it your physical posture? Is it like the passion? Is it, we're all learning how to pray by listening to other people pray. Like, that's how we all learn how to do almost anything, is by observing how other people do things. But I feel like it's a bit more profound than just the functionality of how do you say a good prayer. I think it is in the waiting. It is in just the being and the resting. Because like yesterday when we were talking, I'm like, what would I say? Like, if I was a chaplain going into a hospital with somebody who's obviously staring death in the face, and I walk into that room, like, what would I'm not going to ask them, how are you doing today? That's just a stupid question. Because obviously they're probably not doing very well today. So I'm like, if I was a priest in this true universal sense of the term, priesthood of all believers, and walking into a moment of despair, what do I have to offer? And really all I have to offer is Christ. And really all I have to offer is Christ and prayer. And I'm still trying to figure out, like, what would be the initial question? It's like, maybe it might be as simple as, what do you need right now?
Yeah, well,
to ask,
I think,
and then offering prayer after that.
I think Linda's asked that question. Yeah. What do you need now? Yeah. I mean, one of the other questions I know, and again in the coaching, one of the questions I asked somebody was, because they had an awkward sort of thing to do, and I said, well, how do you want to be present in this space? Yeah. And maybe that question is, that's a bit of a not a non-question, but it could be a bit confusing and not straightforward. But maybe I'm asking myself, how do I be present to this person? Yeah, I could ask the person, how would you like me to be with you? But your question is, what was the question you asked?
Well, I want to rephrase it actually just by thinking about it. I don't want to say, what do you need right now, because that can be a bit too functional. Yeah, I want to get to the heart of the issue. What do you desire right now? That's a bit of a different nuance, because I'm not just thinking of someone who's dying. I'm thinking of somebody who's just going through anything in life that can be categorized as a moment of despair or difficulty, or where they're really just in it, right? What do you desire right now? And so let's just say the person is dying. I'm like, what do you desire right now? And then they might, tongue-in-cheek say, well, to not die. Yeah. And then I'm like, well, Jesus can help you with that. And I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, there's an answer.
Yeah, I would say, or even I would say, just unpack that for me a bit. Yeah, more.
Exactly.
Let unpack that for me. Yeah. What's happening for you? Yeah. As you're lying here, what's on your mind? Yeah. What's So, and I guess that's the sort of posture that I think Andrew was saying in despair, is that you're actually. I guess the sacramental part as a priest, you're not sort of kind of creating Christ there. Christ is already there. You're the priest that it's actually helping discern what that looks like for that person.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I think so. Exactly. And like you just have to like I think a lot of my ministry formation and education was around the functional aspect of ministry and just doing more and more and more. And the more I'm actually in ministry and the more I'm just reflecting on it in my practice, I'm realizing it's actually not me doing more. It's not the answer. It's Christ doing more in the space. And so I remember it's almost like we forgot at least my words of ordination that were charged to me. Go and preach the word and administer the sacraments. That was it. I would want to maybe add a third one. Preach the word, administer the sacraments, and offer prayer. Or like something along those lines. Because the word and sacrament is kind of contained within a service. But offering prayer or in a posture of prayer for both of those is a conversation in the world. But it's just so funny. Like those were the literal words of charge from my district. Go preach the word.
Kind of and that sort of sounds right too. But it's interesting that prayer. I wonder how that conversation we had the other day when we were talking about pastoral leadership, if we brought up that, because Andrew was kind of a little not nervous, but a little apprehensive, apologetic. What I'm about to say sounds really pietistic.
He did, yeah.
He was sort of framing it like,
it's true. It's
this sort of feels a little awkward, but actually this is what I actually do think. And do deeply feel convicted about.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the things that we speak on and preach on are things that we're just struggling with ourselves. So I wouldn't be surprised if you really pushed Andrew. Like he's probably less. This is obviously could be completely incorrect. So I'm not saying this is true, but he could be less relational in his general disposition and more functional, and therefore all his research and time is almost a correction and a rebuke against himself. Because I feel like that. I'm not. We're all relational, sure, but like. There's a deep burden that I feel in carrying someone else's burdens and being relational. Like it's tough, and I don't know if it's how I was raised, but I want to avoid that, And it's almost like me going into this is like a dying to myself of realizing, no, what really matters is being with people and not functionalizing ministry. That the people are the ministry. But
does that say something that's also reminding of when we? Let me go back. When Linda has gone to the hospital and she comes out of a day of being with her, she'll say to me, I'm exhausted. I can, probably three conversations of that nature is about how much you can have for a day. So what's going on there? Because you've now participated in somebody's despair and you've listened to that. And so then, we're not carrying the burden, but we've listened. So we've opened ourselves to that despair.
I guess.
And I guess that's the kind of Christ story of, again, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure this out. I'll find words. Leaning into that, actually, yes, it's death and despair. It's death, but actually out of the nothingness comes life.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, the metaphor of the death-resurrection story is...
Yeah, but I guess to kind of refine what I'm thinking is it's not that it's a burden. Like I simultaneously, paradoxically, don't feel burdened by people's situations.
Right.
It's more, let's just use the word inconvenient.
Oh, right.
That might be a better word.
Yeah.
Where and that's a horrible thing to say.
Yeah, but I get that.
You know
too,
what I mean?
Because life is full and complex, and there's demands on us. You're a father. You sleepless nights. You've got expectations from the institution you work for. You've got expectations from the church that you work for, and so you're just looking for stability and some congruence between those spaces. That So I'm not making excuses, but we're looking for that. And we're looking for space that you can just go.
Yeah.
And so I guess the complexity of other person's despair becomes inconvenience.
But with that being said, like, it's almost, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about, like, what is truth, you do.
Yeah.
And, and,
did that get you in trouble?
well, no, not too much. And I basically said, like, how do we, like, yes, there's truth in the world. Certainly there is. But truth isn't static in a way that we think, especially truth that's, like, in the world, like, it's living. And so, for example, like, you don't even know yourself. And I don't even know myself. It's almost like my entire life is discovering myself. So, like, what's the truth of me? It's like, well, that's dynamic, and that's changing, and I'm surprised, and I'm shocked, and I'm disappointed in myself. All those things.
Yeah.
And so within that, I hold, this doesn't need to be a counseling session, Graham, but I hold, there's an inconvenience of relational ministry for sure. However, I find I am most alive when I am with somebody who's exploring faith and asking faith questions. I am most alive when I'm praying for somebody.
Yeah.
I am most alive when those moments come up of being that mediating presence. But I think I think it's easy to see relational ministry as just being with people, it is certainly that, and that's important, but just to almost like, oh, we're just going through the motions of life and just being there. But in my opinion, as a priest, priesthood of all believers, there needs to be a redemptive edge to all relationality. And I think the redemptive edge is always in this prayer posture.
Yes, because
inviting people into something, in the relationality that you have with the person. And it's not to functionalize the relationship for that particular end, but it's to see that, oh, Christ is actually in this place. And to ignore that is to not kind of see the redemptive edge of this relational interaction.
Putting it, trying to not, maybe to respond to you, and I'm not sure that I'm saying the same thing, although I might, but to throw it a different way, and reflecting on our conversation with Andrew yesterday, I came out of that conversation and I said to Linda, I just feel vitalised. I feel kind of energised. Now, throw that into some other situations I've been in lately, and I'm not vitalised.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, what's the difference?
What's going on?
Yeah.
Is it that I'm looking for the sort of connection, spirit? I don't know, but there's a difference.
Yeah.
And I know where I want to be, and I wonder whether that is part of it. To use the language of spirit, the Spirit's giving. Here's another liturgy. It's like the music's playing and my feet are moving to something, as opposed to maybe some other spaces where I've come out of it and I feel just not quite. Something looks not quite right here. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's happening here for me.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
It makes sense.
So what is that? Is that just me?
Yeah.
Is that just insecurities or is it's not a judgment on either of those spaces. But I think maybe we're looking for that where the Spirit is actually giving life.
Yeah.
And you're sensing something that you're attracted to that's possibly beautiful. Maybe you're overstating the beautiful part there, but it's drawing you to it. There's something happening there.
Yeah.
And I think ministry can be like that too.
Yeah. And I think the drawing is different. Like for me, evangelism and I think evangelism through prayer draws me in. Like when I actually get to engage with someone. Yeah. That's really drives me. But for others, that relationality is in the serving, being the hands and feet of Jesus in the moment of service, of washing people's feet. And that's the same. It's the same kind of posture. Yeah, but
it's funny as with evangelism, because in my relationships with even neighbours, I had a very interesting conversation with the new neighbours up. I've just moved at the house, and I stopped the bike and had a conversation, and so they're from Canada, and they're Indian, and he said to me, and I stopped the bike as I was pushing up the driveway, and just had a conversation. And he made the comment. He said, "Oh," I said, "I'd like to think that New Zealanders are friendly." And he said, "Well," he said, "not everybody stops their bike and has a conversation." And in that, so I was thinking, I mean, part of that is not because I feel that I should do that. It's actually just a way of being. Why wouldn't I do that? But actually, if I really scratch the surface, it actually is deeply welded to my sense of conviction about what it is to be Christian.
Yeah.
To actually give time to the other, to make them welcome,
Yeah.
to create a space. Because his comment was, actually, not everybody does that.
No, certainly not. I'll tell you what, like, I won't say anything more detailed than this, but I've walked past people who, walk through a door and I walk through the same door,
Yeah.
and I'm anticipating a smile,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I smile first.
Yeah.
Don't even glance at me a single bit.
Yeah.
And obviously people are going through their own stuff and their
Yeah,
own world,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
get that. But it's not a given. Like
Yeah.
acknowledging another person in
Yeah.
your proximity is not a given at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My problem with some of that is that because I do that, I have expectations that others, and I think that's not healthy,
Yeah.
because I'm projecting that. Why don't others do this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not my call.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just that sort of an engagement with that. But in my mind, as that space opens up, I have sort of, and it is a prayer. Oh, we should get them down. I wonder how the conversation will roll.
Yeah,
because I know what's going to pop out when I start talking.
Yeah.
My faith's going to pop out.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it does.
All I could see, my neighbours here and there, as an object.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't want to knock that, but for both Linda and I, it kind of doesn't. It feels. I used the word Linda the other day. I'll get myself in trouble in this podcast, but she said to me, "That's quite strong." I said, "Sometimes evangelism feels violent."
Yeah.
And she would have, and I said, "Well, you're violating people's kind of like you're just rocking. This is what you need." And you're thinking, it feels like, like I kind of want like this. And yet I kind of respect people that feel the passion to do that. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, you got to read the room, and then some people have a better understanding of that than others. You're right. I think just in the relationship, there's moments where your faith just pops up, and you have a decision.
Yeah.
Am I going to lean into this or not?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to be the kind of person that just becomes like just a natural, that natural part of who I am.
Yeah.
To where it feels like that. Every time I talk about faith, it's authentic in the sense of, that's me. And so the example was when I handed out Alpha course invitations after my hockey game.
Tell me about that
last night. They're attentive. Like,
so what's inspired that?
What inspired that was I need to invite people to Alpha because I'm telling the congregation that they need to invite people to Alpha, but also as a way of people engaging with the Christian faith. And
what did that feel like for you when you did it?
Oh, I felt fine.
Yeah.
It was
Did you feel kind of like, because there is that sense of...
Oh, how are people going to receive it?
Well, no, I just... That connection between... I've told people we should invite people, and then the question comes to me, am I doing that? Yeah. And then when you actualize that by actually inviting people, you feel like there's integrity with what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I think I knew a couple people knew I was a pastor, but they hadn't... We hadn't talked about it in 7 years since when I moved here, because everyone asked me, "What do you do?" "I'm a pastor." Okay. But then the team has changed quite a bit, so there's tons of people who have no clue who I am, but they know I'm a leader on the team. And so, all the guys respect me. And so at the end of the game, I just said, "Hey, Kyle, can I invite people to something?" He's the manager of the team, plays, and he's like, "Yeah, sure." So I sit down and, we're all like half undressed, and I'm like, this course, over the course of 7 years, I've been a part of this team, and I'm also a pastor in a local church here. And I've never invited you to anything because I've been waiting for something really good to invite you to. And this is that good thing. And,
well, nice.
Then I described what it was, and then I handed the little flyers around. And then I said, also, I can be your unofficial chaplain if you want to.
Oh, yeah.
And then they laughed a little bit. And then so one question, it was a bit quiet at first because it was disruptive in the sense
right.
that,
Yeah, okay.
no one's thinking about this, right?
Yeah.
And now everyone's thinking about faith for the first time in who knows how long. And then someone had to break the ice by being like, are there any good-looking girls at church? And I said, I'll tell you what, if you want to get married, going to church isn't a bad starting place.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's how I said it, right?
Yeah, it's a really nice. It's a nice line.
And then I had a good conversation with one guy afterwards who just had asked me just basic questions about so do you get paid to be a pastor?
Yeah.
Do they give you a house?
Yeah.
And when he said, do they give you a house, I got to tell quite an intense story of prayer around that. And I was in that moment, I was like, am I going to tell this story that is a faith story? Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah.
So I told it and just let it rest.
Yeah.
And then that was that. And then we'll see what happens. I don't, maybe no one will come. It's okay.
But did you feel invigorated from that engagement?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'm an evangelist at heart in the sense of I love talking about faith with people.
Yeah.
And I was quite not convicted, it might not be the right word, drawn to Frank Ritchie's ministry philosophy of letting people need to know where the ministers are. In the space, and that's why the clerical collar for him was so important. Is because it was an immediate identifier of who you were and what you were about. Where I remember, and it's jarring. And I remember being a 22-year-old pastor, and the jarringness of that was I was 22 and a pastor, and that was shocking for people who are older than me. Right now, no one's shocked that I'm a pastor. No one's shocked about anything. I don't jar anything, and most people don't even know I'm a pastor outside of the church community, unless we have a conversation. And so I'm like, well, how do I let people know I'm a pastor without just being like at the start of every hockey season, hey everyone, I'm a pastor. I could do that, but you know what? The collar just makes it speaks without speaking.
Well, I'm reminded where when we've had Jonathan in these conversations, and Jonathan says we need priests.
Yeah, we need priests.
And it's still ringing in my head, because sometimes when I've been in spaces and people ask you, and I said, I'm a minister and pastor. You're a priest.
Then you're like, no, that's not me.
Yeah, well, I think,
Actually, I am.
Yeah, well, I've said kind of, but actually, it's better to actually say, yeah, I'm right.
Yeah, you can call me a priest.
You can call me a priest, yeah, because I do that stuff.
Priest Graeme.
And then, because then it injects into that kind of, it's disruptive.
Yeah.
But it also injects into it kind of a mystery too, like that's kind of weird, but I'm interested.
Yeah, because for sure.
I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's in the culture we're living in. It's like, so you sort of, priest does this sort of stuff. I guess what people are saying. So you kind of got sort of you've got your feet here, but actually you sort of do this stuff in this other world.
Yeah.
So the priest is this kind of go-between.
Yeah, that's exactly what they are.
So why not?
Yeah. And I feel like the everyday Christian version of that of the priesthood of all believers is people actually knowing that you're a Christian.
Yeah.
And so, pastors and priests and ministers have traditionally had a clerical collar to differentiate themselves from others within society, as Frank said, being humble and available, right? But for Christians, I think it is important for people to know that you are a Christian in the workspace you're in your family, in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so what is that? How do people identify themselves as? I mean, because we would say, it's by what they do in the deeds, in their good deeds. And, but I'm like, sometimes, sure, but most of the time we do look a lot like our neighbors on the surface. It's only when you get a bit deeper that you see there's a difference. But people, I think, do need to know where their Christians are, like more now than maybe in the last decade or so. I don't know. I have an answer to that, but I'm like...
Well, I just started thinking about all the passages. I mean, one is the... where is that? Is it Peter?
Is it First Peter?
Yeah, we're a chosen people, a royal priesthood.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, that's a really interesting passage, isn't it? We're a royal priesthood. So, I mean, they become quite cliche, some of these verses. But if you sort of thought about that, a kind of royal priesthood, like Christians, like somebody that actually, I mean, I'm just sort of dreaming and imagining here of, wow, you you traverse two worlds,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of an invitation, not to everybody, but it could be,
Yeah.
of like, so because I don't get I get my living in the space I'm living, but I don't get this bigger piece.
Yeah.
And I don't get the part that we're, a mother, a father, or a brother
Yeah.
who's got cancer and is dying. And I need somebody that can help me figure that out. So that's a priestly role, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I want to connect in a little bit his growth as stabilizer thesis.
Yeah.
And I think we in the conversation we talked about that as a church, within a church ministry model, is like, we feel like we're on the right track if we're growing. And growing is...
Boy, that is and it's so filled with our conversation. And it's difficult to get at it, because if you push against that, it's taken to the other extreme.
Yeah, it is. It's true. It's taken to the extreme of, I don't care if people come in to the door anymore. I don't care about growth in general. It's like, no. You can't. It's not unimportant. It's just, I think the key differentiation is, what is stabilizing you? What is stabilizing not only you as an individual, but stabilizing your faith community? Is it the pursuit of growth and you feel insecure if you're not growing? Or is there something else at play that needs to stabilize?
That's a really good question, Joey, and quite a good way in which to apply Hermit Rosa, because we did mention that podcast, and maybe that's a good point here, just to sort of pivot a little bit to say, when he was talking about, because he referred to Charles Taylor, and he referred to Hermit
Rosa.
Yeah. So who's James Taylor?
Yeah, so Charles Taylor is a Catholic theologian. Is he still alive?
He's getting pretty on.
He's like 90-something now.
He's a Canadian.
He's a Canadian.
He's a French Canadian.
He's a Quebecois.
Is that what you call him?
Yeah, from Quebecer. Someone from Quebec. Anyway, the province. Charles Taylor, Catholic. Less of a theologian, more of a cultural philosopher.
Yes.
And so what he wrote a few books. He wrote one called The Social Imaginary, which is basically, what is the thing that... How are we who we are? How do we become who we are? And it's actually, you're less of an individual than you think.
Yeah.
You become who you are by the thousands of years of history that have gone before you, and including the people who embody that in your immediate presence. Yeah. And we all have an imagination that is driving us. The second thing he did is he took that thesis, the social imaginary thesis, and he then applied it to the secular world. And he said, how did we become secular? How did our social imaginary in a pre-modern world where the entire world is enchanted and there's evil forces and good forces, and we need good forces to ward off evil forces, hence why you have relics and crosses and holy water and the Eucharist, and the material world is not flat, it's enlivened, and a thunderstorm can be either God judging you or a disease is Satan persecuting you. There's that's happening in the pre-modern, pre-Reformation world. And how did we get from that to, there's just the natural world. There's a flatness to it. God isn't in the world. If God exists, he's outside the world. Actually, there's no such thing as spiritual forces. That's just all made up. How do we get from point A to point B? So he wrote that thesis. Hermit Rosa, from what I understand from Andrew Root, came along as a student of Charles Taylor.
I didn't realize that.
I didn't realize that either.
Yeah.
And he looked at the modern world as like, what is actually culturally going on within modernity? So he's isolating this 500-year history and just isolating it down probably from about the Industrial Revolution to the present day. And what makes modern people modern? And I guess from what Andrew Root is saying, the key distinction is the stabilizer in society. The stabilizer in society is growth, and that is a modern thing. It is not a thing that has been happening for most of human history.
Yes, because he talks about in his big book, and he's written a few books, probably not as much as Charles Taylor, but his big sort of magnus opus is called Resonance.
Yeah.
So he, in reading, and I just recently reread the chapter on dynamic stabilisation, big word in it, which is what you were saying about the stabilisers and growth. And he talks about that what we moved from was sort of so stabilisation's always been there. And I guess the stabilisation, if I'm correct here, we're looking for, human life is looking for stability. That's not wrong.
No, it's a
and that's
pursuit.
What the world at the moment is really unstable.
Well,
because
we need stability.
Because it's just, it's fluctuating. It's,
To use a metaphor, we need to know that our feet are planted firmly somewhere.
So he talks about, so what's the difference? He talks about adaptive stabilisation.
Yeah.
And he talks about dynamic stabilisation. We're living in a kind of dynamic stabilisation. So I guess that means it's a whole system is created now, that it's got to be dynamic. Mm-hmm. And so it's always moving. So I guess the adaptive is that we adapt with what's coming along, and we find things that bring a sense of congruence and stability. Yeah. So this dynamic stabilisation is the environment that we're in now. Yeah.
And then so what he parallels that to is, and you can just flick on the 6 o'clock news. Is the economy up or is the economy down?
Yep.
If it's down, we're unstable. If it's up, we're stable. If it's flat, we're unstable. We need growth to feel stable. If we're not growing, we're falling apart. And what we've done in the church is we unknowingly, I think, we've taken that stabilization and we not only placed it within the church, we've also placed it with our own spiritual lives. And that if we're not growing, either numerically or spiritually, we are unstable. And it's not to say that growth isn't a foreign concept in the Bible. It's just the question is, what is the stabilizer, who is the stabilizer?
Yes,
in the biblical story. And my assumption is, like, there's moments in my life where it seems like I'm just growing immensely. Like I feel like God's calling me into different levels of obedience, and I'm learning heaps. That I'm being pushed in a good way, and I'm becoming a different person because of that. But there's also large pockets of my life where I felt like I wasn't growing. Not that I wasn't, I felt like I wasn't. And so my sense of stability was rocked through that, because I'm like, well, if I'm not growing, then I'm falling away, is the axiom, is the thought. But I'm like, no, that's not. I don't think that's true. I think the growth. Goes against many passages of scripture, I think, on the surface, but I think we get down deeper. Like the vine and the branches of us abiding in Christ, and us producing or bearing much fruit. People see that as growth and spiritual growth. I don't think that's what people are getting at. What Christ is getting at. I think what he's saying is, if we're using the stabilization metaphor, no, you finding yourself in me stabilizes you. Whatever happens outside of that, let it be the will of God. Let it be. Just it is what it is. But you find your stability in me. And so I think if we find our stability in him, I think inevitably we will be pushed and we will grow in a sense as the world comes at us. Yeah, it's a really
interesting, because then how do you find language? I mean, I've wrestled with this for a while. Some in sort of the ministry space, or with teaching here at Laidlaw since we've been way back, and really have sort of pushed against this sort of success thing, because that is sort of like, well, did I reach that goal? Which is kind of often around growth. Mm-hmm. And I've tried to think a little bit of what we would put in that space. I mean, faithfulness is a word. Integrity is a word. So what's important here with the vine and the is it faithfulness?
Well, I think the emphasis on the passage is definitely on the you will bear much fruit.
Yeah,
that does ring in the ears. Yeah. I think you read it in the Greek, you're like, yep, that's the strong emphasis. But what does that mean, though? Is that our modern understanding of growth that we've placed onto that passage, or is there something else at play within the bearing fruit that is a bit more foreign to us than we think? Because we're viewing everything through our lens of modernity, whether we like it or not.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And often with fruit, we don't have to go very far. And like I just heard the news, and so our New Zealand's doing very well in its dairy products at the moment, bringing good income into New Zealand, which is how would you production?
Yeah.
Production. So we're surrounded by those metaphors to interpret. When you talk about fruit, we're thinking about how much effect that is having that we can see and we can measure.
Well, I wonder if I should read the passage again. I should have it up in front of me. I wonder if the bearing the fruit is that we taste good.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, that's a really interesting. Taste good as in...
What's the point of fruit? Is it to have more fruit?
Yeah, well, that's a really good thought.
The point of fruit isn't to have more fruit. The point of fruit is to eat it.
And it tastes good.
And it tastes good.
And it looks good.
Yeah, he doesn't say we bear rotten fruit. If he said, if you aren't connected to me, then you're going to bear rotten fruit.
Yeah.
What that tells me, if that was the case, then clearly the emphasis is on the quality of the fruit. It's not the abundance. Well, you bear much fruit. No,
abundance doesn't need to be. Abundance doesn't need to be. I mean, we often think again. Abundance
exactly.
is interpreted as a quantity.
Yeah.
But abundance can be abundance in the fullness of the
fullness or completeness or
the abundance of that. Like it was a kiwi fruit, and it was full of flavour.
I'm probably wrong. I'm willing to be wrong, but
thought,
I hadn't had that thought.
Yeah, that's a really good thought. It's an interesting sermon.
Well, maybe, who knows? I don't want to be an eisegetical preacher. However, but I forget what Andrew said around what he sees as a stabilizer. I don't know if he entirely got it either.
Yeah, I don't. He did talk about faithfulness.
He talked about faithfulness because he juxtaposed the end of the Gospel of Luke around Jesus explaining the story of the Bible to the people on the road to Emmaus, and then
I love that story because it's
that's our story for Lunch on the Way.
Yeah,
and then juxtaposing that with the disciples, being together, teaching, eating, and breaking of bread and serving the poor. Yeah. And so I thought that it was the Acts 2:42 or whatever that was, that was the stabilizer. And the result seemed like was growth, but I'm like, I don't think the point is to functionalize it. I think it's to use a term, it's in the ontology. It's in the being. Yeah. Less of the epistemology of the knowing how to get something out of it. I think it's in the ontology. So it's in the being under the apostles' teaching. It's in the being together in fellowship. It's in the being of caring each other for each other's needs, of serving the poor, and of prayer. And that is what stabilizes a community. And consequently, that's what stabilizes an individual Christian.
So in one sense, are we saying here that that stabilizer is the being is... Well, it's actually very much in the sense of now, isn't it? The now. I don't mean sort of we just live in the moment, but there is a sense in which that we experience God in this interaction.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's true because the opposite is...
And that's I mean, maybe that coincides with the sort of don't worry about tomorrow. Be aware that God is present in the world. I'm again thinking of the Matthew passage.
Yeah, I think you're
right. Be
right.
aware that God is actually at work here. He's providing for your need. He's caring for this. Rest and lean into that.
Well,
is that?
I think that's right. I think that's it. It is the being in the now, because I think what the growth as stabilizer does for a church and especially for society is what I have right now is never enough.
So I have to think of tomorrow. Is that the story of the rich man who builds his? Because that follows that in chapter 7. I mean, that's interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
But is that? I mean, it is connected. Mm-hmm. That he's constantly thinking of tomorrow, and I haven't got enough. I mean, I'm not. So I've got to think of it tomorrow. I've got to shore up my security. I've got to shore up my. So therefore, I've got to grow my asset.
Yeah.
But don't we do that? I mean, we're kind of doing this anyway. I mean, isn't that wrong? I mean, you got money in the bank to buy a house.
No. I don't think growth, to have things that grow isn't wrong. That's not the point.
No.
I think the point is, what is the stabilizer if anything, if we were to use James K. Smith, what is the thing that you're worshiping that is pointing to the vision of the good life you actually truly hold? And I think if growth is your stabilizer, you will never have enough. And Jesus clearly rebukes that. That's mammon, right? That's money, and money in the sense of not just money, but of the acquisition of more and more and more. And
well, that could be applied to, so I don't want to be awful to your tradition, but I could put mine as, have I got enough spirit,
Well,
or have I got enough holiness,
Yeah.
It ends up being distorted.
Well, have I got enough exactly, it gets distorted, and that's why, or it's like, are we planting enough churches? Or are we, we have a vision of seeing 500 people come to worship at our location. And it's like, well, when you get to 500, well, then what's the goal? Well, it's 1,000. It's like, well, okay, when is enough? And then you would say, well, it's never enough. And I'm like, that's the point. That means the stabilizer that you have and your sense of meaning and purpose and your sense of things are going right is out of whack. And we need a new stabilizer. And it's really the old thing, and which is the now thing, which is Christ.
Yeah, I mean, just a passage. Was it a psalm? It's not clear in my head, the quote. What O man are you that that are mindful to, and it sort of goes on about to live and have our being in Him.
Who are we that you're mindful of us, kind of thing, paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And
I think it goes on to say to live and to move and to have our being in Him. Really,
to move. That's it.
I mean, that's wow. That's it's quite challenging.
There we go. We got somewhere.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Thanks, Graeme.
And mountains we were born, so frightfully belated to grace the dawn.